Hello, everyone. My name is Fariba Parsa. I am the founder and president of Women's E-Learning Leadership. Well Organization is a nonprofit in state of Virginia. We empower Iranian women in leadership skills through online courses, mentorship, and global networking. We have also a digital library that there are in both in Farsi and English. When we have books and articles about women's rights. You can visit our website. It's called wellfordemocracy.org. And you can connect with us, send us an email, and we can to hear about the Well organization, about our courses, and how you can be a volunteer if you want to be with our organization. One of the activities we have is have a YouTube channel when we interview women leaders, experts, and you can see all these videos in our YouTube channel, some of them in Farsi, some of them in English. And today we are honored to talk with Miss Leah Kral, talk about her work. So Leah is an expert and author who helped nonprofit organization innovate for social change. Her recent books, as you can see in her site, is called "Innovation for Social Change: How Widely Successful Nonprofit Inspire and Deliver Results." This book is available in Amazon, and you can also buy it in the many different bookstores. Leah is also director of strategy and innovation at the Maketas Center at George Mason University. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. So please, so let me first ask you, tell me a little about more about yourself, your job, your nonprofit organization, and what was your motivation for your work?
Well, thank you so much, Fariba. It's an honor to talk with you today on Well for Democracy. Yeah, again, my name is Leah Kral, and I'm a nonprofit consultant and author of the book that you see there, Innovation for Social Change. So a little bit about me. For decades, I've been providing consulting for nonprofits around the country, and what I do is help busy nonprofit teams kind of break out of that daily routine to draw out their best creative thinking about program strategy, program design, vision, how we measure success. I live just outside of the Washington, D.C. area here in Alexandria, Virginia. And so how did I, come to this role? Well, my career took some kind of wild twists and turns. I didn't always expect it to be doing what I do today. But in my early career, I worked in the for-profit world. I was working in industry, and I worked in quality systems and engineering. I started out as sort of a junior CAD designer. And so I worked in the for-profit world for about 7 years, and but I felt deep down inside that something was missing. Like I didn't feel like this was my true vocation, but I wasn't really quite sure what it should be. So I was just going through kind of my own soul searching process. And my husband, who's just far more adventurous than I am, had always had this dream to experience international development, and he wanted to sign up for the United States Peace Corps. And so, because I was going through this kind of career uncertainty, and we talked through it together, and we decided, okay, let's apply as a married couple. So we did. This was over 20 years ago, but we applied as a married couple for the U.S. Peace Corps, and we ended up doing a 2-year tour of duty as Peace Corps volunteers, and we were sent to Jamaica. And that whole experience, those 2 years in Jamaica, really rocked my world. I ended up working with Habitat for Humanity. I also taught computer literacy at a teacher's college, which was in the capital, Kingston, in a pretty violent neighborhood. And I saw a lot of extreme poverty. I saw families living in shacks that they built by hand. I saw communities destroyed by hurricanes. I remember when I got a tour of my school where I would be teaching, and someone pointed out the school library, I just felt tears welling up, right? Just all these wonderful things we take for granted in the US that it's hard, it's just it was a shock to my system. So I saw this poverty that really moved me, but I also saw heroes. And I think of that Fred Rogers quote. I think it was around September 11th when Fred Rogers said something like, in times of crisis, look for the heroes. And I saw heroes, and many of them were women. So those 2 years in Jamaica were really life-changing. And it got me interested in questions like, how do we solve these things? What are real solutions to poverty? And so from then on, I knew I wanted to work with people doing that important work of nonprofits and philanthropy and social change and lifting people up. So now when I think back on that kind of wild, career path, in hindsight, I'm really glad that I got to have a foot in both worlds. So I got exposed to the private sector and the great management thinkers, people like Drucker and Covey and Deming, who are kind of my heroes. I learned so much from them, but also got to experience this world of social change. And so what I set out to do was combine the intersection of those two worlds, translating really the best management frameworks, but tailored for the nonprofit workplace. And that's really what I've been doing these last 2 decades, and I love it. So my full-time role is at a nonprofit called the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. And it's an economics research center with a staff of about 200 people. And I've been there 18 years now, serving as sort of an internal consultant to our program teams. And also on the side, I am a nonprofit consultant as well.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's amazing. And but this interview is more about your book. So could you talk about your book, what it's about, and what do you hope readers take from this book?
Yeah, so I was just kind of humming along doing this work for my nonprofit, and I was, happy as could be. But one day, my executive director at Mercatus knocked on my door, and he said, "Hey, Leah, I've been hearing good things about these workshops of yours. Why don't you put it into book form, and you can do it on our time?" And
Mm.
so I was super excited when he made that offer to me, and of course, I said yes and just jumped at the opportunity. And I knew that I wanted to write a book that would help busy nonprofit practitioners and people doing that hard work of social change. And what was kind of swirling around in my mind was, could I write a book about nonprofit innovation? And so, first off, I think that a good question is, well, what do we even mean by nonprofit innovation? Usually people think of the for-profit world or inventing the next iPad or something like that. But there's plenty of innovation that's happening all the time in the social sector and the nonprofit sector, and it can be big or small. So innovation can be really big, like the American Civil Rights Movement. And I could talk more about that. Another example of really big innovation was the creation of the 911 emergency phone system that didn't exist at one point, but it was through philanthropy and nonprofits coming together, along with emergency workers, that they figured out a better solution. They innovated together. Or you think of the big innovations like the things that the X Prize Foundation works on. Those are usually pretty big with the national or even an international scope. But innovation can be also quite small and humble. If it's just a new or better way of doing things, you can think of maybe a nonprofit reception area where maybe before you had a paper-based intake system with pen and pencil, but changing that to an iPad or, an electronic information intake, that can save, if it saves 5-10 minutes a day, you just save steps and resources and staff time that can now be put to better use elsewhere. So I would like to argue that both big and small innovation matter, and we really want to encourage both types of innovation and build it into our everyday workplace practices. But of course, this is easier said than done. How do we do that? So in my book, I'll give you sort of the brief synopsis, but there's four main takeaways for readers. The first section of the book, it's actually a lot of fun. So I use design thinking for about the first, quarter or third of the book. And design thinking is used by really creative companies, a lot of marketing firms. Design thinking has been around for, at least 20, maybe longer years, 20, 30 years. Used by creative companies like Pixar to draw out a team's best thinking about their work. And so I started wondering, if Pixar can use design thinking to make a movie better, can nonprofits use design thinking to make our program interventions better? And I think we can. So that first third of the book is using design thinking and asking a lot of kind of self-reflection questions or questions you can take your team through to help you think through just more creatively about what your nonprofit's trying to do. And it's a lot of fun. People love that part of the book. The second takeaway for readers would be how to conduct small-scale experiments, because we can experiment in nonprofits as well. It's not just something for scientific labs. The third is how to cultivate an innovation-friendly workplace culture and how to do that. And the fourth is where it gets really personal. It's about how to bring your own innovation A game. And what are the traits of social entrepreneurs? What are the traits of nonprofit innovators? Things like tenacity, persuasiveness. How do we learn how to do that? And I share lots of stories that illustrate that. So basically, I share those four key takeaways throughout the book with lots of real world stories. For example, say from the American Civil Rights Movement, Rhinos Without Borders, Alcoholics Anonymous. The opening chapter of the book is a story of a student-run school in New Jersey, a student-run school. It's just an amazing story. That's the opening chapter. And in the end, when I finished the book, I counted up, there are actually stories of 70 different nonprofits and 20 foundations. And I think that's what people really like is the real world stories. So to me, just to sum it up, I think innovation is really the opposite of business as usual. And these practices can be done by any size nonprofit, any type of mission, and any budget. And it's really just to help us dream big, ask the right questions, experiment, and innovate boldly.
Wow, that's amazing. I think nonprofit organization could get so much out of this book, reading this book, and think about more about innovation. I think differently because you're right. When you say innovation, we think about the for-profit and the iPad and the new technology. That's right. That's very interesting. So, what gets in the way of nonprofit being innovative and effective? What do you think?
Yes, that's a great question. Yeah, every time I provide a webinar or speak to groups of nonprofits, I usually ask that question. I ask the audience that question, you tell me what gets in the way. What do you all see as what gets in the way of workplace innovation? If you have a good idea and you want to bring it forward, what are the obstacles? And I hear similar answers when I ask that. So first, we all struggle with this in nonprofits. There's sort of a fog. I call it the fog of good intentions. So, good intentions don't automatically mean that we have clarity about what we need to do. And there's a great quote about this from Stephen Covey. It goes something like, "We might be climbing up the ladder, but is our ladder leaning against the right wall in the first place? How do we know?" And then we can have compassion fatigue. We can be stretched too thin. We can struggle to prioritize and say no to things. I see something often a lot in the nonprofit world that we can be myopic and siloed when instead we should be thinking about partnerships with other organizations. And, there can be this sort of misguided thinking that, well, we're just too busy. We don't have time to be strategic. You can also have nonprofit workplace cultures where the frontline staff, the people who are likely to have the best ideas, aren't empowered to speak up, and they might just keep their heads down and kind of stay in their lane and not be innovative or not bring bold ideas forward. So if we don't pay attention, I love that you asked that, if we don't pay attention to obstacles to innovation, those entrepreneurial staff are going to take their time and talents elsewhere. So I can be brief, a really good story of this. What does it look like in an organization that has a great innovation culture? I think of Mayo Clinic, and they're probably one of the best nonprofit hospitals in the world. They're really famous for finding innovative solutions for people who are very sick. And their reputation did not happen by accident. So in interviews, team members from Mayo Clinic will say that good patient outcomes are because of their organizational values. And one of those values is the needs of the patient come first. And another value is unsurpassed collaboration. And so their team members are empowered, trained, and encouraged to put those values into practice every day. And so those values end up becoming part of their culture and guiding all decisions, big or small. So an example would be that the Mayo Clinic night staff we're really concerned about how noise can affect a patient's peace of mind and how lack of sleep can disrupt the healing process. So the Mayo team members came up with this idea to conduct noise studies that eventually led to designing quieter flooring, quieter wheels on food carts, and lower decibels for overhead paging. To me, that's a great example of innovation, that the night staff were empowered to do that. So creating that kind of workplace culture of innovation, it doesn't happen by accident. It's very intentional. And as we think about all those things that feed into a workplace culture, how do we assign authority? Who gets to make decisions in an organization and why? Should it be bottom up? Should it be top down? How do we design people's roles? So that middle section of my book is all about the processes and systems that create a workplace where innovation is part of our everyday DNA.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's a wonderful example of a highly innovative organization. Yeah, maybe you can share one more, maybe other organization, nonprofit, who had be successful innovation. And also, I want to hear about stories for nonprofits failure can be also the case.
Yes, I love that question. And one thing I learned in writing the book, it was very hard to find examples of nonprofit failures because I think, because we have to raise money, nonprofits are very, very careful of their brand, and even donors. Everyone gets sort of embarrassed when a nonprofit fails. So it took a lot of digging to find those stories, but I really like your question because they really go hand in hand, both innovation and failure. We can't have innovation without experimentation and some failure. So failure sometimes it comes with the territory of innovation. So some nonprofits actually are both highly innovative, but also have stories of failure. And I could share two stories of that if we have time. I'll share two. One is from the American Civil Rights Movement, and another is from Alcoholics Anonymous. So, most nonprofits, as I was researching and looking for trends, I really enjoyed finding these, kind of origin stories of nonprofits that we all have heard of. Like, how did they do it? What was their startup story? So usually in that startup phase, most nonprofits start very small, humble, and local. They start out highly experimental. And usually there's one founder or maybe just a handful of founders who have a very strong sense of a social problem they want to solve, and a deep personal commitment to do something about it. But during that early startup phase, they may not be entirely sure about how they're going to solve it. So they're trying things and they're finding their way in the dark. So an example of this, the two founders of Alcoholics Anonymous met somewhat accidentally on a business trip. So each of them had struggled deeply with addiction. They had tried everything, and they both were they had given up basically on finding anything that could help them. This was back in the 1930s, and people, were pretty ignorant about addiction, and they would do pretty extreme things like, people would become committed or locked up or even have lobotomies if they were, wrestling with addiction. So things weren't good. So these two men accidentally met each other on a business trip. One of them was a surgeon, and the other was a sales professional. And they just ended up meeting and having a really meaningful conversation. They were just deeply honest with each other about their struggles with addiction. And they were really surprised through these conversations that they had. They ended up helping each other towards sobriety. And they realized they had stumbled onto something that might help other people. So they founded a nonprofit. It wasn't called Alcoholics Anonymous in the beginning, but they realized they had found something that might help others. So it would take years, it would take time, experimentation, and even failure for them to ultimately discover their famous 12-step model. And it's famous. They've helped many, many people, and they have copycats all over the world of their 12-step model now. But some things they had to learn the hard way. Like they didn't realize right away how helpful it would be for members to be anonymous. And so they had a very public problem when one of their members was a famous baseball player who kind of fell off the wagon very publicly. And so this created all sorts of problems for their brand and for the trust that their members had in their model. And so, they kind of learned the hard way, right? They were just learning by doing through trial and error, and they were innovating in the process. So to me, a common denominator for innovation involves kind of finding our way in the dark. So this experimentation, risk, and a willingness to fail just comes with the territory. And it's really essential for leaders and organizations and board members to have the right attitude, towards failure. But let me check. Do I have time for one more
Yeah,
story?
yeah, we have time.
Okay, I think your
Please.
listeners are going to really like this, especially. My second example is especially relevant to folks who are listening in who are passionate about empowering women. I think there's so much we can learn from the American Civil Rights Movement of the 1950s and the 1960s. So just imagine, that you're an African American living back then in the Southern United States, in Selma, Alabama, say in the 1960s, and you wanted to vote. Well, every obstacle imaginable would have been blocking your way. You would have had to pay an expensive poll tax that you probably couldn't afford. You need to study and pass a rigged literacy test. You need to find a currently registered voter who is willing to vouch for you so that you could register to vote. And of course, no white voter would do that. These anti-democratic tactics have been around for a long time, and they still arise in different forms or in, different countries today. So with the American Civil Rights Movement, these tactics and others were really meant to ensure that segregationist whites stayed in control of the local and county government. And the tactics worked. In Selma and the surrounding county of 15,000 African Americans who were eligible to vote, less than 350 people were registered. So, those terrible tactics worked. There was violence, intimidation, murder, and those were just the brutal realities that were facing American citizens. But despite all those obstacles, people organized, and they didn't always succeed. So I wanted to read just a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., who was writing about this time. He was describing their lessons from Albany, Georgia. So I'll read this. Dr. Martin Luther King said, "The mistake I made there was to protest against segregation generally, rather than against a single and distinct facet of it. Our protest was so vague that we got nothing, and the people were left very depressed and in despair. It would have been much better to have concentrated upon integrating the buses or the lunch counters. One victory of this kind would have been symbolic. It would have galvanized support and boosted morale. So when we planned our strategy for Birmingham months later, we spent many hours assessing Albany and learning from its errors. Our appraisals not only helped make our subsequent tactics more effective, but revealed that Albany was far from an unqualified failure." So I love that. I love that he was being so honest and humble about things that didn't work so that they could learn from them. You could really hear the brilliance of their strategy, that they learned from failures. They were very courageous and innovative, and they tried new forms of protest. And, of course, we know the rest of the story, that the civil rights movement did change the nation and ultimately helped to bring about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So notice how they weren't afraid of failures. They learned from them and ultimately were successful. So I share a lot more of their story and stories like that in more detail in my book. But I love those examples from Alcoholics and Anonymous and from the Civil Rights Movement. I just think we can learn so much from them.
Yeah, yeah. I think there are so much we can learn. Both the Iranian organization, women organization, we share this video with other women organization from different countries, connecting within my network. I think there are so many valuable things women can learn from, not women, I mean everyone who works with social change. It's not only women, it's
Yes.
everyone.
Yeah, and we shouldn't get discouraged, like both in the American Civil Rights Movement and the American Women's Suffrage Movement, neither of them were founded by major or funded by major foundations, which I thought was so interesting. Even the major philanthropy organizations were too vested in the status quo, but they succeeded anyway, just through raising money through grassroots. So I think that we can learn from that and feel really encouraged.
Yeah, yeah, that's you're right. How can people connect with you if you want you as a speaker or just want to connect with you? How they
Oh,
can?
wonderful. Yeah, I have a website. It's my name, leahcrawl.com. And from my website, then there's a contact me form. I also have a blog on Substack. There's a link there that, feel free to subscribe. I like writing about these topics. And I'm also really active on LinkedIn and Twitter. Twitter X. So yeah, feel free to, contact me or connect with me. There's a really nice community on social media that's kind of engaging on these types of questions about nonprofit innovation. So yeah, I'd love to connect with your audience.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, and I hope we can meet again and talk for your other works and maybe in other books. Thank you so much. And
Oh, thank you, Fariba. It was an honor to be here.
yeah, thank you. Bye bye.